Hello, Internet friends, and welcome back to Love-Hate Relationship, an opinionated podcast for opinionated people. I'm Andy Boel.
And I'm Alex Ruiz, and as always, we are here to brighten your day, anchor your soul, and tell you how to live your lives in that order. And Andy, it's just the two of us again, and
the sweet dulcet tones of Matt Calder have left for now, but we'll have to get him on sooner rather than later again.
Yeah, I'm not even fucking around. The number of people who listen regularly who are like, we really like Matt. Matt should be around all the time. Matt's voice is so great. Matt's voice is
so velvety.
Okay, I happen to know for a fact that one was just your wife.
Well, yeah, but I fully agree with it.
I don't know if I'd call Matt's voice. I think Matt has a creamier voice than he does velvety. Like, it's very. Hi, Matt. You have a very creamy voice.
I mean, I've stuck my creamy I can buy. You know, also the fact that Matt's made it pretty clear he gets embarrassed when we shower compliments on him makes me really want to go, no, it's a rich umber velvet and makes me feel safe.
Umber. Matt's voice doesn't make me feel safe, but it does make me feel dangerous, which, you know, in a way is its own delight. Hey Mom, thanks for listening. Love you.
So
I can admit this freely. Because literally one person I work with listens to this podcast, and I happen to know she's cool. But I'm not seriously looking for a new job right now, but I've started casually just oh, okay, here's a thing that just slid across my desk. What does this look like? And I have to cotton to the idea of, oh shit, if I were to switch jobs or employers, I'd probably have to I work a 4-day work week right now. Granted, they're 11-hour days, but I work a 4-day work week. I have Fridays off. It's so nice. And the idea of having to go back to normie hours is not pleasant to me, but also sure. I get home at I leave for work really, really early and I get home really late at night 4 days a week, and that's kind of its own bitch. So I hate change, Andrew. Change makes me uncomfortable, but also sometimes things kind of suck for their own reasons.
I mean, the grass is always greener, my man, but you know, change doesn't need to be the worst thing ever.
I'm allergic to grass, you bitch.
So it is always greener on the other side because you can't touch it.
Ugh. Hate it. Oh, God. I'm sorry. I think I interrupted you. What were you about to say?
Oh, some terrible pun about, or not terrible pun, some terribly depressing anecdote about, you know, as the guy who is at 4.5 years at the same job, change doesn't need to be a scary thing, Alex.
Jesus Christ. I can't imagine doing 4.5 years of anything.
Isn't your 4.5-year wedding anniversary coming up?
I mean, career-wise. And no, my 3-year anniversary passed, 5 months ago.
So technically your 4.5 anniversary is coming up. It's just...
Look, my marriage is one of the only things that's, consistently awesome in my life. So, it's my marriage, this podcast, and I don't know, I'm getting better at playing guitar again. That's all that's working right now.
There you go. What more do you need?
Psychological health?
Fair enough.
Sleep? 400-pound deadlift? I can think of lots of shit, dude.
Yeah, I should have thought better before opening that can of worms.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you again. What were you about to say?
Oh, you know...
And another thing. I'm sorry, go ahead.
We've gotten to the point where these come out pretty darn quickly after we released them, but, you know, memes still have a very short shelf life. But right now the biggest trend is the decade photo review phenomena right now. People taking pictures of themselves from 2009 versus pictures of 2019 and showing everybody their glow ups. And
I did one.
Yeah, you did do one. You were hot then, you're hot now, and you're going to be hot in 10 years.
Yeah, hell yeah. Like, I don't get why people are like, oh my God, I can't believe how much I've changed. Or, oh my God, I can't believe that I look so different from... Like, no, I was hot back then. I'm hella hot now. Like, I'm just a good-looking guy. Like, and so are all of y'all are good-looking too. Like, deal with it.
Amen. We're all beautiful people. If you're listening to this podcast, you're beautiful.
So are you going to do one, Andy?
You know, I really have no interest in doing one. Mariah did one of the couple of us, and I quite like those 2 pictures of us. And really, you know, I'm not going to get any extra endorphin boost by doing one of my own. So,
I mean, that's fair. You know, what's funny is when I did mine, I actually took mine from a picture of me and Stephanie. I was tempted to use one that Mariah had actually taken.
Sure.
Of us, like, because there was a point where we got Mariah to take photos of us when we were like 19 and fetuses, basically. Like, and I was wearing like a shitty Andy Warhol t-shirt, and like Stephanie like was in this, I think she was in like this bright pink with like jeans. We still have some of those photos hanging in our apartment right now.
I was about to say, I know that photo shoot. Y'all were on some swings.
Yeah, no, we walked around a playground in Avalon Park in Orlando, Florida, and it was super fun, and we were precious and innocent and big splendid and bright-eyed and
shiny and new.
You know, the financial crisis had only just happened, and we didn't know it was going to hit us at all because, like, we were still in college. And
oh, that's what I want to do. I want to, like, take a debt comparison of the past decade.
Oh, no.
Which actually, you know, you two specifically would be the perfect people to do about that, because you were just starting college versus, you know, being graduated for as long as you have been. I want to see your debts glow up.
Andrew, do you know what debts I had when I was taking that photo shoot? I used my first credit card to buy my 12-string guitar, which I still own, because Sam Ash had a deal where if you signed up for the credit card and bought something, there was no interest for 15 months. So I was like, wait, so I can buy this guitar, pay like 20 or 30 bucks a month, and I'll not have to pay any interest on it. Yes, I am buying this 12-string electric acoustic guitar, which again is sitting in my, like, right next to my living room right now. It is hanging from a wall next to my window. It's beautiful, but my debt was like $280 on that guitar.
I'm sitting here thinking I've cracked it and this is a great idea and nothing's gonna talk me out of it. You're making the better case to be like young, innocent, hadn't gone to college yet, versus
and owed $200-something on a 12-string acoustic electric Washburn cutaway guitar,
versus being featured in what was it, the Wall Street Journal, for you and your wife's comparative debts and the choices you've had to make as people to deal with them.
Basically, yeah. So I'd be down for this challenge if you think you can make it go viral.
There are a lot of sad millennials who I think can make it go viral. And then go back and listen to our debt episode.
I can always trust in you to bring it back to an old episode.
That's right.
Just for the plug. And you know what? This is our 36th episode. I feel like as we get closer to like 50 or 100, we just have more and more shit we can comment on.
Oh yeah, that was the secret goal always of that being just we're going to get more and more self-referential and up our own assholes as this goes.
Well, I mean, we already followed a stupid number of X-Men accounts.
That's true.
Because we already followed Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men on the official LHR Twitter. That's at LHR Pod. That's at LHR POD, listeners. we were already following a bunch of them, so I feel like doing the X-Men episode was just to justify how much we retweet Jay and Miles and Battle of the Atom and Xavier Files and all these comic book writers and Kelly Sue DeConnick and everybody else.
You're not wrong.
Yeah, no. It's just in that case it was, predictive. It was getting ahead of the issue. So now we can justify it. If tweets were tax deductible, we would be all set.
Oh, wouldn't we just?
You want to get started?
Yeah. I was trying to think of a book segue, but it wasn't coming to me.
Look, it's a nerdy ass topic, so
it pretty much is, but near and dear to me. So every episode on love-hate relationship, Alex pointed out this is our 36th episode, but maybe you're a new listener, you read the title, and this is your first, so welcome. Every episode, one of us talks about something we love. The other talks about something that they hate, and then we take your relationship questions. And this week it's my love, and you read the title. We're talking about The Hobbit, which is, I've been reflecting on it more and more as we were writing the notes for this episode. Truly one of my most favorite beloved books of all time. If I have to go to a party and tell somebody, okay, what's a book that encapsulates all of this? The answer is probably The Hobbit. So, turning your own shtick back around you, I want to ask you, Alex, what was the first novel you ever read? Not the first picture book, not the first, serialized children's chapter book where there was 40 of them, but what was the first novel?
Honestly, so I have had various answers for this, and it's been pointed out to me by the people involved. I used to have a habit of stealing my older sister's books and reading them, and sometimes I would steal her school books because I thought that she was reading them for fun, when really no, she did not in fact want to read Three Musketeers. She had to read Three Musketeers. But it fucked with my timeline, because I've gotten the ages wrong on this. So the first book that I do remember stealing from my sister and reading, and I'm reasonably sure if I understand the timeline, and this is a book that wasn't the Goosebumps that she kept or something like that, probably The Witch of Blackbird Pond.
Okay.
Which, are you familiar?
I had to read that for elementary school myself at some point in time. Maybe middle school.
Yeah, it was one of those, Johnny Tremaine, or one of those that you just, it was a historical fiction, YA-ish, not even ish, middle grade novel that was clearly designed so that Scholastic could sell 900,000 copies across schools, and little children learning about Pilgrim times could read a novel about it instead of a textbook. Actually, surprisingly, a delightful novel about it's the least witch burny book ever.
Right.
They don't go to lynch the old crone until the end of the book. And even then, it gets seriously undercut, and nothing big happens at the end. Spoilers. Witch of Blackbird Pond is more of a journey, not destination kind of novel. But it's quite delightful. But I do remember reading that sometime before the age of 10. I think having stolen my sister's copy of it, and I enjoyed the hell out of that. But that was a chapter book that, I don't know if it was the first, but that was probably the first one that stands out in my head as one that, stuck with me.
Okay.
So, Witch of Blackbird Pond.
All right. That's a great answer. And, apologies for anybody who was desperately avoiding those Witch of Blackbird Pond spoilers. But
I think that shit came out in 1983.
Yeah, I know. No, that's a really great answer. As I suppose you and our listeners can guess, my answer is The Hobbit. I was around the same age. I was 10 or 11, and it was the first book that I read cover to cover that wasn't, Animorphs or the Bailey School Kids, or the Silver Age X-Men omnibus from the library, or, any book that, I was having to read for school, because honestly, I don't remember much of those besides The Witch of Blackburn Pond and, Hatchet. But no, written by John Ronald Reuel Tolkien in 1937, The Hobbit is a fantasy children's novel about the adventures of Bilbo Baggins, the titular hobbit who is semi-reluctantly thrown into an epic quest to recapture a dwarven kingdom from an evil dragon that took it over many years ago.
Far over the misty mountains cold.
And, just to start the discussion, it feels so weird to me to be giving a plot synopsis for The Hobbit, because I feel like it's a household name for books, at least in my house, certainly. This...
I mean, it wasn't for me, but in fairness, English language fantasy novels were not super prominent in, a Colombian household, or at least my Colombian household.
Sure, fair.
So I bring this up to say I appreciate you giving the synopsis, because I didn't know anything about The Hobbit, honestly, until the Lord of the Rings movies came out, the Peter Jackson original Lord of the Rings trilogy. I didn't know what the fuck Lord of the Rings was until then. And then, I learned about The Hobbit after getting introduced to it through those movies. So,
sure.
Granted, it's a different landscape now than it was back then, but I appreciate the synopsis, I don't think everyone has that, and I wouldn't assume it.
And that's a really fair point, and that's something I shouldn't do, because, yeah, saying it out loud, it makes me realize, this was a cornerstone of my own childhood, but my dad was a huge Doctor Who D&D fantasy nerd.
Sure.
The first time The Hobbit was something I experienced was when he read it to me and my baby brother, every night for a couple weeks as we would go to sleep. And that happened more than once in my childhood. So, no, you really bring up a good point that, especially for, non-white men, The Hobbit isn't, a household literary name.
I'm not trying to undercut your point.
No, it's an interesting aspect to think about.
So, I think it's adorable that your dad read The Hobbit to you. That is freaking precious. Please continue. I don't want to derail you. I'm very invested in this, actually. Both as a fan of The Hobbit and, I read your notes. This has a lot of sweetness to it. So please go ahead.
It really does. This is talking about, we just talked about the X-Men and, gushed over Storm and Nightcrawler and Cyclops, and, talked about reading those as a kid, and I certainly loved them, but this book that I am currently holding in my hands and is the same copy that I read and my dad read, I'm flipping through this. This is a version of The Hobbit that came in a box set with the entire Lord of the Rings, and the box is this beautifully painted mountainscape with a dragon, and if you look closely you can see Gollum crawling out of a cave. I'm holding a book from 1978 that I flip through, and I see little drawings of runes. I on the back cover I drew pictures of the swords Orcrist and Glamdring, which are the magic swords that they find in a cave. On the first page I wrote, as a 10-year-old, "This belongs to Andy Boel," and a phone number that I forgot I had ever had. This was the first thing I was I'm going to leave this in a park somewhere, and when you find it, return this book to me. This book means so much to me, and this book, so Tolkien, to follow my formula a little bit, Tolkien is one of the preeminent grandfathers of modern fantasy. That's that. I think that's a very reasonable claim to make. Tolkien basically redefined what modern fantasy tropes and themes were in a lasting way that hasn't gone away yet. Setting tropes of the genre, like the idea that dwarves are these warrior miners and elves are these refined classic bowmen, long-haired, beautiful people who live in the trees, wizards being more like D&D than King Arthur, and inventing an entire fantasy race of hobbits who have gone on to be called halflings in anything else that wasn't a Tolkien book or a movie. And the first part of that, the idea that J.R.R. Tolkien made all of these lasting things stick is a big part as to why I love The Hobbit, because it feels to me like something foundational, and that is absolutely amplified by the fact that, as I've said numerous times already, this was read to me at a young age. I watched the cartoon movie when I was super little. This was instilled in me. This is pretty much the only book I can remember my dad reading to me. And that's not to say that, he didn't do other stuff or wasn't present or anything, but, reading was something that I did with my mom or I did alone, but not The Hobbit, And
sure, that's
really special. This book is always going to have a deep personal resonance with me. But so obviously this is like one of the things that makes Andy, but you have since read the books, right? I guess I shouldn't have assumed that.
No, and I think I've even talked about this on a previous episode. I think it was our George R.R. Martin one.
Sure.
I tried to read the Lord of the Rings books.
Right.
After the movies came out. I liked the movies. I've never been much of a fantasy fan. I'm upfront with that. I respect the genre, but I'm more of a sci-fi and horror genre reader than fantasy. But, to each their own. I've never had a problem with it. I tried to read Lord of the Rings. It took me 6 months to read Fellowship.
Sure.
I checked it out from the library, and they had 19 copies of it, so it didn't matter. I just kept renewing it. It took forever for me to read. It was such a slog for me. Not to say it's badly written. It's just not my kind of writing. And I remember finishing it, turning it in, checking out the Two Towers, and I got a few pages into Two Towers and just went, I'm not into this. I can't slog through. Never mind the one book, but a whole series of this. So I returned that, and then a while later, some friends had recommended to me The Hobbit, just saying it was a lot easier of a read. So I checked out a copy of The Hobbit from the library and loved it. I got through the whole book. It was very pleasant to read. It was enjoyable. It was fun. It was engaging. It was a really great experience. I love The Hobbit. It is the only book of the, Lord of the Rings canon that I have ever successfully gotten through, but to me, in my limited capacity, I think it's the best one,
And I agree with that. Obviously, I'm a little bit biased, but I think that's a really concise but accurate review. It is so much more easier to read than Lord of the Rings, Two Towers, Return of the King. Those are epics on a really high up scale. I think people forget because the movies made the story a lot more accessible, but it's
and cut a whole lot.
It cut a whole lot. Fellowship of the Ring, you're 50 pages in, 100 pages in, and Sam and Frodo have just left the Shire and are camping out with some elf who isn't even in the movies, and there's a whole lot
fucking Tom Bombadil. Fuck you, Tom Bombadil. I hate your ass.
Hey, come, Derry dog, up along my hearties, hobbits, ponies, oh, we are fond of parties.
Yeah, there's a whole lot that goes on, and the movies did a great job of translating that story, but The Hobbit, the book itself, didn't need translation. It was the first one that Tolkien wrote, and the story is wonderfully charming of what actually birthed the book. J.R.R. Tolkien was basically teaching at a school. I don't remember if it was a university or more like a primary school, but in the he's giving out a test to people, and he's grading papers, and somebody had turned in a blank page and hadn't done their assignment, and without even really thinking about it, Tolkien writes down the words that open the book: "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit." And within the next year or so, he had written the entire epic. It took him another couple of decades, I want to say, to write the Lord of the Rings series, but The Hobbit just kind of poured out of his pen. And I think there's something about just how easy the story is. It's a series of adventures. It's this charming little hero who isn't the strongest, he isn't the smartest, he isn't the fastest, but he is clever, and he's got a really good heart, and he's got somebody helping him get out of his shell, get out along the way. I think that's another thing about the book, thematically, that it makes it such a good thing for children to read. It's about going out and getting out of your shell and having an adventure, and who doesn't want to go out and have an adventure, boy, girl, or what have you.
Yeah. I think I remember reading that, part of the issue... So Tolkien was a languages guy. He was a linguist, yep, by training. There was a great story a professor of mine in undergrad told me about how a professor of his had explained, I think, seeing some kind of lecture or something where J.R.R. Tolkien was speaking at an academic lecture, and he fucking starts quoting Beowulf in its original Old English, just off the top of his head. And it's just that's who J.R.R. Tolkien is. He's the guy who, learned Old English so that he could memorize Beowulf. He has all these languages in his head. And in a lot of ways, The Lord of the Rings always felt a little bogged down by that, because a lot of it kind of seems like an excuse for him to take his made-up languages and
right, put
them into something. But The Hobbit never felt that way. The Hobbit was the straightforward story. The Hobbit was a novel by a novelist who was essentially writing for children. You can set it up right next to C.S. Lewis, who was famously a dear friend of J.R.R. Tolkien. You can put it right next to Chronicles of Narnia in terms of just comprehension and the ability to follow the fucking thing, which doesn't exist for the rest of that series,
Absolutely. I talked about the legacy of The Hobbit. You look at any fantasy property, from the stuff that R.A. Salvatore writes to Warcraft to Skyrim, anything, and it's either we are totally copying a lot of the motifs of The Hobbit, or we are throwing this completely on its head because we want to avoid comparisons to Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. But either way, it has left it's inspired everything that came after it. But the other reason I love the book is it's a good book. It's easy to comprehend, but more than that, it's an enjoyable adventure, and it's well written. Bilbo, Thorin, Gollum, Gandalf, and more than anything, the dragon Smaug. These are amazingly crafted characters, even when Gandalf keeps excusing himself from the narrative, and which even as a kid, I thought this was bullshit. Why does Gandalf keep leaving everybody and then showing up to save their asses?
Narrative convenience.
Yeah, really. He's a walking Deus Ex. Literally, if you understand the Silmarillion. It's just so cool. All these situations, getting kidnapped by these big scary trolls and making them fight, because at the end of the day they're so stupid you can trick them into staying out past the sun, and fighting monsters, having a riddle contest with this evil little creature, and doing the thing that Beowulf made a standard motif. At the end, you fight the evil dragon. Like, Smaug didn't invent the boss monster, but he did kind of invent the boss monster with a glowing weak spot, because anybody who is familiar with the book or watched the movie, you'll remember the thing with Smaug is his hide was impenetrable, tougher than the hardest armor, except for the one scale that fell out, and you got to shoot an arrow through the scale. So Resident Evil perfected the idea of shooting the glowy weak spot, but I put it to you that Tolkien was the first one to put it in practice. It's so amazing. It's so wonderful. It's so good and fun, and I love Bilbo. I love the dwarves with all their crazy names. I love the Hobbit.
Sidebar.
Yeah.
We should totally do a love segment on Resident Evil at some
Oh,
point.
absolutely.
That's apropos of almost nothing, but
well, so I'm still trying to tool around how we handle topics that we both love, but there are also things about it we hate, and Resident Evil's perfect for that.
We make a decision about where it will finally lie, and then we are happy to criticize or praise it as necessary within that context. Normally that ends up being like, we love this, and...
Right. Oh, well, there you go then.
Yeah, like...
To wrap...
I like Lord of the Rings a lot, and it's a slog.
Yeah, it's damn near incomprehensible in some ways. Just to delve back, and this is my final talking point, The Hobbit was met with instant critical praise upon release. And in release, we're talking about 1937. Tolkien was a veteran of World War I, and I haven't seen the Tolkien movie, but everyone has made it pretty clear that, like, there are clear comparisons of Tolkien's time during the war influenced his writing style, both with The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. But, just to put it in context, this was 1937. Printing press was, it wasn't a new thing, but it wasn't like today where you can get a book instantly on your Kindle and know what the hot new bestsellers list book is. This thing sold out within 3 months and has never in its entire publishing history gone out of print, which is
Sure.
a wonderful little factoid for me. The Hobbit has inspired numerous plays, movies, video games. The 2 film adaptations. There was the 1977 Rankin and Bass, like that Rankin and Bass, like the guys who made the Rudolph movies, cartoon, which was god-awfully ugly to look at, but also like this delightful little adventure. And before I can even remember like having the book read to me, I remember watching the movie. And then, of course, in the past decade, the live-action Peter Jackson trilogy, which is very visually pretty, but pretty much an empty calorie movie, in my opinion, aside from the utterly brilliant Misty Mountain song that the dwarves sing, and the scene between Martin Freeman's Bilbo and Benedict Cumberbatch's Smaug, which is perfect.
Come now. Don't be shy. Step into the light.
Weirdest Sherlock prequel ever.
Right? No, I know so many people that this book has also touched. Dear friend of the show, Catherine, one of my dear friends has gotten a tattoo of markings from the map, which is a damn good idea of a tattoo, and I'm probably going to steal one day. People love this book. I dearly love this book. It gave me warm fuzzies to write up the notes and reflect on this this deeply personal, this deeply good book. This like, my family doesn't have a lot of heirlooms. It's never really been an important thing. But
Sure.
like I said earlier, this was a copy my dad bought and read to me from the 70s. This is something my dad got when he was like in college, and I'm sitting here holding it in my hands, and I'm going to read it to my kids if I ever have them, and I'm going to read it to somebody's kids if I don't ever have children of my own. I'm going to read this to Chris's. I'm going to read this to our other friend's son. That's what I'm going to do.
Aww. I mean, I was more than happy to backseat this one a lot, just because I don't have the emotional connection to this novel that you do, and to me that was the best part of your notes. This is a great novel. Like, I can sit here and put on my English major hat and delve into the literary analysis of it. I can put on my pop culture hat and talk about its influence, and you've already touched on that beautifully. But I think the thing that interested me the most to hear from you, Andrew Richard, is just how much it meant to you personally. I think this is a really, really good novel. I like it a lot. It's one of the few fantasy novels that I can honestly say I love, that I think we own it. It's not my copy. I think it's Stephanie's copy, but I'm pretty sure we own it somewhere. I haven't read it in a number of years, but I'm really, really delighted that you brought this to our table today. Like, it just warms me and makes me feel so delighted. And that's not just because I poured myself like the biggest fuck off glass of red wine before we started recording ever. Like literally the size of a Hobbit. But no, thank you for bringing this, and thank you for bringing that emotion to it. I loved this discussion. This was delightful. Thank you.
You're very welcome, man. And I do hope that the listeners, you guys, enjoyed this just as much, because this really is one where like I can laud it critically, but at the end of the day, I love this book because it is my childhood wrapped up in a book, and I love it because I love it, and I do love it. So thank you, man.
Yeah. You ready to move on to the next segment?
Always, which I'm hoping doesn't have any I'm hoping your hate doesn't have any deep-seated roots in your childhood.
you know? Really not. Andrew, I do not come from healthy people. I do not come from So anyway, Andy, as always, I like to intro my segments. You stole my shtick from me on this one, and you're always welcome to it. I like to start off by asking a question to kind of intro my topic. So Andy, my question to you: what, in your memory, immediate or otherwise, is the funniest or most ridiculous product or advertisement for something that promises to get you six-pack abs that you have witnessed in your life?
So, if you're our age, you probably watched Comedy Central a lot.
Hell yeah.
And, late night Comedy Central would really start to get some bizarre commercials. There would always, of course, be Girls Gone Wild. There would be the weird VHS skit movie that was like Jesus fights ninjas and Joey Buttafuoco gets a hair transplant. Yeah, right? I remember Joey Buttafuoco specifically. And between those two commercials, you would see the Ab Blaster 6000 or something, and just the notion that so many of us bought, where it's like, okay, I'm gonna buy this vibrating little diode thing, strap it on my stomach, and it's gonna get me ripped while I sit on the couch. Because there would be the ones where it's like, do crunches on the couch, or buy this weird chair that'll give you abs. And then there was the one that was like, no, just strap some shit, we're gonna shake your tummy a bunch while you watch TV, and then you'll get six-pack abs. and it was the ab blaster, the ab cruncher, or something. It was always completely ridiculous, and that is my answer for you.
That shit has been around since the 50s, Andrew.
Sure.
Okay. I appreciate that. I think I, like you, have trouble nailing down like one particular this is the worst thing. I do feel there was one that was like a belt that you could wear like at any time throughout the day. It was like you can hide it under your clothes and do it at work, or you can do it at home. And it was literally like, we will send tiny electrical shocks directly into your abdomen and it will stimulate muscle growth. And that's how you'll get these six-pack abs.
Yeah, like you can't even look it up online now because I just tried and it's all like actual workouts you can do from the couch.
Yeah, no, like, and don't bother Googling it. It's all worthless.
Oh, yeah.
Folks, my hate topic for this episode is the cultural obsession with six-pack abs.
Getting the feeling of coming in the gym.
And it's been a minute since I've done a health-related topic. So I feel like I need to, give a little bit of background on this, because I feel like on the surface there are a lot of ways that I think folks might expect me to tackle this, and maybe I'll feed into those stereotypes, maybe I won't, but I want to come from a place that's, scientifically informed, but also culturally informed. You cool with that, Andy?
Absolutely.
Good. So, when I talk about six-pack abs, what I am specifically referring to are the rectus abdominis muscles. To give this a little bit of background, the abdominal musculature, which is generally referred to as, in regular nomenclature as your core, which if you spend any amount of time on like athlete or health Twitter or YouTube, is that word alone is controversial. There's so much bullshitty health info out there, you guys. So that's your whole like abdominal area. And it's a whole lot of different muscle groups that for the most part are all, decently important to the structural integrity of your body. Your abdominal area ranges from like the bottom of your chest all the way down to the top of your pelvis. And it encompasses the entire waist, from the pectoral muscles and a full belt around the body, which is, it's essential to everything from pushing a car when you're broken down off the side of the road, to standing up, to being able to do weird crunches on the couch because the infomercial tells you to. Speaking specifically about the rectus abdominis, or what we typically refer to as the abs, functionally speaking, these are the muscles that are, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They're the ones directly like on the front of your belly, like your belly button. They surround the belly button. They're from right about that lower abdomen down to the top of the pelvis, right there right there in the center. Structurally speaking, they're responsible for, basically bending the lumbar spine, bending your back. Think crunches. That motion where you are sitting up, and even then a sit-up isn't fully a rectal abdominis. Did I say rectal abdominis?
Yeah, you
did. Rectus abdominis movement. It's basically a crunch movement. People will tell you that crunches won't give you six-pack abs. There's some truth to that. I'll get into that. But the point is, that's what those muscles are responsible for. And granted, you need to be able to do that if you're, say, getting up from a reclined position or a laying down position. It's not that they're functionally do nothing, but they are pretty overrated to anything that you functionally need in terms of health or strength. And they have a really weird significance surrounding that. So, I'm going to throw a quick set of numbers out there.
Okay.
The way that you get six-pack abs, the secret to six-pack abs, if you will, and it's not really a secret, I'm being bullshitty. The way to get six-pack abs is essentially to, if you are a cis male, have a body fat percentage of around 8 to 12%. If you're a cis woman, 15 to 22%. Parenthetical, if you are trans, if you are under any kind of hormone or any kind of hormone treatment, any kind of surgical alteration from your birth body, these things can kind of vary on a spectrum there. But essentially, I'm using cis men and women as my gauge here because honestly, that's what the research focuses on. So getting that disclaimer out of the way. But for cis men, 8 to 12% body fat. For cis women, 15 to 22%. Get your body fat there, and then maybe do a little bit of direct work on that musculature. That can be crunches, that can be hanging leg raises, that can be certain forms of sit-ups, boat poses. If you're a yoga person, you do a little bit of work and get your body fat there, you will have six-pack abs, basically. That is the key. The better your genetics for something like having a body fat percentage in that range, the less of either of those things you really need to put any effort into. That's something that doesn't get touched on a lot. Genetics are a huge factor to this kind of thing. I mentioned at the top of this, Andrew, that I said I don't come from healthy people. That was a bit of a disclaimer. I, familially speaking, don't have a lot of people whose genetics would put us in the skinny range. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, I feel like I'm bred of the same sort of stock.
Yeah, like we're stocky folk. That's the best way to put it. I don't have, like, you meet lanky folk. You do. There are people out there who just genetically speaking, in the weightlifters world, which is what I'm most familiar with, they're called hard gainers. You know, they're the people who can eat a bag of donuts every goddamn morning and never gain a pound. They are so rail thin.
Yeah. That's metabolic rate and it's genetics. It's exactly what you're talking about. You know, it's the thigh gap, which, as far as I know, hasn't become like the big it trend for, you know, people of the feminine persuasion to make sure you have the thigh gap. That was the exact same thing where people were having to sit here and break down. It's like, do you know how you have the thigh gap? It's if your parents have the thigh gap or your grandparents have the thigh gap. So I hear you.
Yeah. I mean, in the weightlifting forums that I follow, one of the most common questions is basically, how do I become a great weightlifter? And the most common and frankly the best answer for that is make sure that your parents were great weightlifters. That's a serious answer that
Sure.
like coaches throw around. Serious is the wrong word there. That's to put people in their place. The fact of the matter is genetics are a huge factor there.
Yeah.
The idea that anyone, quote unquote, anyone could get six-pack abs. I mean, theoretically speaking, if we're just talking like not a real human being who exists in the real world, we're talking about just a theoretical person whose body fat is, let's say it's a cis male, mid-20s to mid-30s, 30% body fat. Knowing nothing about this person, I could probably explain to them what they would need to do in terms of calorie restrictions and an exercise regimen to get them six-pack abs in 6 to 12 weeks.
To order, call the number on your screen or send check or money order for the amount shown plus shipping and handling. Must be 18 or older to call.
A, will they be healthy at the conclusion of that? The answer is no. B, will they be able to maintain those abs after that 6 to 12 weeks? Maybe?
Maybe.
Probably not. How long are they willing to keep up the starvation diet that I would have to put them on? And the ridiculous exercise regimen that I would have to put them on? C, do they have a good doctor? Because those body fat percentages I quoted to you are not really the best out there for health. Andy, are you a Bruce Lee fan?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, yeah. I reached out to friend of the show, David. Hey, David, you get 2 shout-outs in a row, one for giving me my first comic book and one for the discussion we had about six-pack abs a few weeks ago.
Good on you, David.
David's one of my go-to people when I want to bounce ideas off about, diet, exercise, health, performance, all this stuff, and he has been for years. When I talked to him about this, he made a point to bring up, and he's a huge Bruce Lee fan, and this is a story he told me years ago, and he reminded me of it here. Bruce Lee famously had a ridiculously low body weight. He had a ridiculous exercise regimen, and he had a ridiculous dietary regimen, and he also had ridiculously good genetics. Bruce Lee famously died pretty young, and one of the prevailing theories as to why he died so young was the fact that he had such a low body fat percentage. If you can show me a picture of Bruce Lee without abs, I will probably assume it's photoshopped because he just had always had them. But body fat percentages that low can result in organ failure, renal failure, kidney failure, liver failure, heart failure, gastrointestinal issues. It's the kind of thing that, frankly, if you are not genetically disposed towards it, it can kind of kill you.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like not to turn this to a completely different topic, but I mean, this reminds me of a lot of the same problems that, people who suffer from anorexia or bulimia wind up going through. There is such a fine line, whether it's just aesthetics or physical health, between too skinny and too fat, too overweight.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't have to tell you, we demonize fat in this culture. We demonize both people considered fat, as in arbitrarily designated as overweight, but also just having fat in general. There's a belief that fat in general of any kind is unhealthy. And you need fat. You need fat to survive. Andy, you've done keto before. How much of that is eating fat?
Yeah, the most of it.
Yeah. And there's a reason for that. I have argued against keto before on this very podcast. I talked about all the things that were wrong with keto. One thing that keto actually gets right is the fact that it does not demonize fat as a consumable. A lot of people who follow keto do still demonize fat as something to have on your body. And I mean, don't get me wrong, if you are a cis dude with 8% body fat and that's just what you naturally sit at, okay, that's what you naturally sit at. I don't want to demonize being overly skinny, and I'm trying to walk a fine line in this argument. I don't know if I'm doing a good job at all. But the thing I want to emphasize is there is an artificial standard to six-pack abs that is, quite frankly, dangerous to chase. Did you ever watch a documentary, Andy, called Bigger, Faster, Stronger, or ever hear of it?
Bigger, Faster, Stronger. No, I can't say that is one I'm familiar with.
Okay. I think it's on Netflix still, but it is a documentary. The documentarian who runs it or who directs it and is kind of in it is, he works in a gym. He's an amateur power lifter. His older brother is actually a somewhat famous powerlifter named Mark Bell. The documentarian's name is Chris Bell. But it's an entire documentary about steroid usage. And there's a brief section of it that I really, really liked, and I wish they'd spent more time on. But he interviews basically performers in other categories other than sports using performance-enhancing drugs. It's a documentary about performance-enhancing drugs, and he basically goes to a porn star and asks if they use Viagra or other like dick pill kind of stuff. And the porn stars are like, absolutely, 100%. Are you kidding? I need to fuck for 12 hours. That's my job. I 100% use, it doesn't matter how hot my co-stars are. It doesn't matter how like virile I think I am. I 100% need to use performance enhancing drugs for this.
So I'm coming day and night.
And there's a part where he is meeting with these fitness models. And these are not people, these are people who are advertising swimwear. They're advertising your gym equipment. Number one, they're not using that gym equipment to get those abs. Sorry. The people in those infomercials that Andy and I referenced at the beginning, they're not actually doing that program. They never have been. They were hired to do the advertising because they already had those bodies. On top of that, they are artificially crafting their bodies to do that. They are using whatever substances they need to in order to ensure that they look the way that they do for their photo shoots. Just like professional bodybuilders, the reason they look so like defined when they go up on stage is because they are effectively in levels of body fat percentage at that time of like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6%, sometimes like less, which they do literally just for that competition day, which they've gotten down to so that they can, for the, hour and a half that this bodybuilding show is happening, for the afternoon that this photo shoot is happening, they are down to a body fat percentage that can reflect this frankly unstable, unsustainable level of appearance. And if you try and do that long term, you just can't. Your body isn't designed to do it.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is another time where I'm just going to rant at the media. If it's not 24-hour news, it's advertising.
Sure.
But I
got one thing, and I think this will tie into what you're about to say. Officially, last I checked, the strongest man in the world is Hathor Bjornsson. Also,
I think he just won World's Strongest Man.
Yeah, also known as the Mountain from Game of Thrones. Look up pictures of Hathor, and I'm looking at it right now. He didn't have a six-pack when he was the Mountain. You look at most of the pictures where he's shirtless. He doesn't have... I can find one picture where he kind of has six-pack abs. And he is the strongest man in the world. Officially.
And he's also absolutely on steroids because World's Strongest Man does not drug test.
Well, there you go.
Don't know if anyone knows that. That's strength. Strength is not necessarily healthy. I guarantee you, the people at IPF Worlds, the Powerlifting International Championships, I guarantee you, most of those people are not healthy. Like with most athletics, they are pushing their bodies to a point that is long-term unsustainable because they're trying to maximize their performance for a particular competition. At that point, the competition matters more than their health. That is a choice that professional athletes make. You are not a professional athlete, you listening to me right now. Andy, are you a professional athlete?
Fuck no.
Yeah. I'm not a professional athlete either. I might be the strongest person that Andy knows.
Yeah.
And I am not very strong by weightlifter standards. Not even a little bit. I mentioned deadlifting 400 pounds at the beginning of this episode. That's an actual goal I have for the end of 2019. I want to finally hit 400 pounds. That is less than double my body weight. The world record deadlift right now is by a guy named Eddie Hall, who has actually beaten Hafthor Bjornsson in World's Strongest Man in the past. And I believe it was an 1,100-pound deadlift that he did. That is ungodly.
Yeah.
And I will never meet anything. Granted, the man is like 300-some, 400-some pounds when he did that. But that was 1,100 pounds. I'm not that strong, you guys. I don't have six-pack abs either. Occasionally, I accidentally kind of like get a little definition in my stomach, but just a little. And I'm not trying for it, but my body fat is nowhere near that level, and it never will be. And I don't really want it to be, you know? The amount of effort it takes to get to those body fat percentages, what you have to do with your life, what you have to do with your body to hit that standard isn't healthy for most of us, can't be sustained long-term for most of us. And honestly, like, I keep railing this point, but I think for me, the biggest thing is the thing I hate about the conceit of six-pack abs is how much it is given to us as a standard of beauty, when honestly, it's just a standard of how privileged you are. It's a standard of when you see the dudes lined up in 300, they trained hard for that movie. They trained very hard for that movie. You can go on YouTube and see how Gerard Butler and all those other motherfuckers trained to look like Spartans. A, Spartans didn't really look like that. B, guarantee you, all of those actors, or if not all, the vast, vast, vast majority of them were working with personal trainers, personal nutritionists on top of the training regimen they were already doing, and were getting some chemical assistance. Was that B or C? I don't even remember.
That was B. I was going to say C, a lot more exposed peni.
I mean, I just flashed back to Wild Things and Kevin Bacon's exposed dong, like a baby's arm holding an apple, which is my gold standard for Hollywood exposed peni. I needed a moment. And even then, in that movie, he didn't really have six-pack abs. He kind of had like some definition, but the man looked good.
Yeah.
I don't want to glorify the opposite. I don't. This isn't about attacking people. This is about attacking an industry. This is about attacking a standard. This is about attacking a cultural norm. This is about saying, y'all, if you see something that looks artificial, it is probably artificial. It is almost certainly artificial. The people shown to us are selected specifically because they already match this thing. Those infomercials we watched, they cast that way. The movies we watch, they cast that way. The standards presented to you are not important. So I want to close out this section just to remind everyone. It isn't that everyone with six-pack abs is a terrible person or is weak or unhealthy. An individual might be, but it's not that every one of them is. And you know what? You, dear listener, you, person hearing my voice, who just listened to me rant and Andy be weirdly silent throughout most of it.
Hey, I was giving you your moment.
Fuck you. I love you so much, but you're way too nice. Dear listener, I don't think you're a bad person if you want six-pack abs or if you're attracted to them. Honestly, like, if you like your pornography to include, six-pack abs and people downing Viagra so that they can fuck for 12 hours, you're not a bad person for that.
I watch a man and a woman making love. I'm like, oh, do you like the guy to have a small, half-flaccid penis? He goes, no, I like big, hard-throbbing cock.
You're not. But the way that those things are valued is outright dangerous. And it's only thanks to a public misunderstanding of health and fitness. And that's not okay.
Yeah.
And have your fantasies. I don't want to take anyone's fantasies away from them, but I do want you to be able to separate your fantasies from your realities, from what your, pie in the sky desires might be, from what is actually okay. And yeah, that's what I wanted to get at. Andy, any final thoughts on this one before we go on to our question?
I mean, in the 1500s, high body fat percentage was a sign of great attractiveness because it meant you had enough excess money that you weren't starving. So, physical perception of attractiveness and strength is purely subjective and always has been and always will be. So I thank you for railing against it.
You're very welcome. Also, just putting this out there, Latinos never supported thigh gaps. So, Andy, I a little bit blame white people for this shit.
Important.
Just needed to put that out there.
As with all other things, white people are to blame.
You ready for our question?
Yes, because this one is the first genuine somebody reached out and gave us a question I feel like we've had in a while, a couple episodes at least.
A couple of episodes, not that long.
Not that long. But so without any further ado, dear LHR, I have recently been told that my biological grandfather, who I have never met, is interested in meeting me and trying to have a relationship of sorts. Some backstory: he is my mother's father. However, he and my mother had a rift when she was a teenager, and he agreed to allow her stepfather to adopt her. I don't know much about it other than it had something to do with him trying to convert her to becoming a Mormon. Now, my mother passed away over 18 years ago. I feel like that was the best time to start that relationship. As a teenager, I could have used the extra support in my life after losing a parent. The fact that he didn't do that makes me feel as though he doesn't have any genuine interest in me. Now, I'm in my 30s and have never felt the need to connect with him. However, I can't help but be curious about him as he was my biological grandfather. I believe he has many other children besides my mother, so there is a possibility that meeting him could open up a whole new set of aunts, uncles, and cousins who I've never met either. As I've recently become a father myself, I have a new appreciation for familial bonds. Any advice?
Okay. We do need to give this person a name. So we have someone who discovers a long-lost relative and is tasked with, figuring out what to do with that information. I have an idea, but Andy, do you have any first?
I was sitting here being like, how far the rabbit hole do I want to go down? I have a feeling that your idea is better than the Royal Tannenbaums reference I was cooking up in my head, so go ahead.
I mean, I was going to go with the singular, I don't know if it's the singular best, but definitely one of the top 3 best Adam Sandler films of all time, Mr.Deeds.
Oh, that's a great one.
Especially because now you can do that cool ass, want to touch your feet drop.
Your great uncle did not let me change his socks for him either. I like feet. I do not know why.
Yes, Mr. Deeds, I'm here for it.
Okay, sweet. All right, you read the question. Should I start with my initial thoughts?
Yeah, go for it, my man.
Okay, so Mr. Deeds. I still don't remember your first name because the movie was just called Mr. Deeds and everyone calls you Deeds in the movie, so it's all good. Deeds. I think before anything else, I am going to say to you that there is one part of your question that stands out to me that I'm going to touch on very briefly and then pass the mic back to Andy and then probably talk a little bit more down the way. But something you say here makes me question a little bit how you're attacking this. And it's specifically the part where you say, as a teenager, you could have used the extra support in your life after losing a parent, and the fact that he didn't reach out makes you feel like he doesn't have any genuine interest in you. I don't want to write off your feelings. I don't. And I want to be clear with that up front. I do, however, want to say that that logic to me, to my ears, doesn't go from point A to point B. If he didn't reach out back then, if you want to give him the benefit of the doubt, there are many reasons why he might not have done that. He might have thought that it wasn't his place to. I don't know if he knew exactly what was going on. I don't know if he thought that he might interfere with your grief. If maybe he might think that you would have viewed him as trying to step in and take over for a parent that, you admit there was some estrangement there. That was a very complicated situation. I'm not saying that you need to discount the feelings there, but to say that because he didn't reach out back then, he must not have any genuine interest in you is assuming a lot. And if nothing else, I would encourage you to interrogate that. And if not look to have compassion about it, at least have perspective about that. You don't know what he was feeling back then. So assuming it and writing him off because of that immediately without more thought is maybe not the best way to go. Andy?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I don't want to advise you to look at the glass too half full or too half empty. What I will say, you mentioned you've recently become a father yourself. I wonder if your biological grandfather is aware of this. I'm assuming here in the internet age that he is. And, there is a question of how much of it is this man wants to have a relationship with his great-grandson, which, I'm not saying that is a bad motivation or anything like that. I also think about a dear friend of mine who was estranged from her father, and he was living in Mexico and I believe got cancer and went pretty suddenly. And in the last couple months of my friend's father's life, she and her sister, restarted and rekindled a relationship with their father, and also did get the thing that, you mentioned you're at least somewhat interested in, where an entire second family, an entire new wing of their family who were all living in Mexico, opened up, and they started, forming all these new relationships with cousins and half siblings and the like, and that was a thing of great joy for my friend. So, I'm ever the optimist. I'm the dopey smiling golden retriever to Alex's squinting nonplussed cat, and I sit here and go, what is the worst thing that could happen? You open yourself up to be hurt again by this man who has caused you some emotional pain in the past. That is certainly a risk, but if the guy is interested and is trying to put forth the effort now to have a relationship, I think in the spirit of family, if you can forgive your grandfather, which I think is really the question here, if you decide you can, then you should try to reforge this bond with him.
Believe it or not, Andy, curmudgeonly nonplussed cat that I am, you and I are, I think, more in agreement about this than I think I think I really like your caveat about if Deeds can forgive his grandfather. That's important because You say that your mother passed away 18 years ago. That's a fair amount of time, but that also, some people never get over that. Some people, and we don't know what your mother said of your grandfather to you. You say that you don't know a whole lot about the situation. That could be a blessing, that could be a curse. You don't know.
I will say, all my positive stuff aside, the slightly vague, and I'm not blaming you for being vague. Maybe you don't know yourself, but the idea that their relationship fell out over religion is troubling.
It's troubling to you?
I just in the fact that, like, speaking as somebody with my own faith myself, I very much, my skin starts to crawl over parents, or in this case grandparents, trying to assert religious beliefs onto others. That's all I mean.
Okay, yeah, I don't disagree with that. I was curious more than anything.
Sure. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah. No, you're good. You're good. This is a discussion, Andrew. We have a back and forth. I like our back and forth. And I assume that, Deeds likes our back and forth too, because he wrote in. I didn't even make it rhyme. So all this to say, Deeds, given the scenario, I think Andy's right that you don't have a whole lot to lose. If you, now granted, start easy. I 100% agree, or we'll state up front. Start easy. He says he wants to meet and, try to have a relationship. Meet first. If you, start with a phone call, if he lives near you, maybe, meet up and grab a cup of coffee or lunch or something. You don't know this man. And blood doesn't matter as much as the fact that you have zero knowledge of anything about this dude. It is entirely possible that you could meet up with him and he could immediately try and get you to convert to the Church of Latter-day Saints. And, we all loved Book of Mormon, but that's immediate red flag right there.
Yeah.
So, yeah. You're not a bad person if you give him a chance. You're not a bad person either way in this situation, whatever decision you make. But you're not a bad person if you give him a chance. If you, meet up with him, maybe exchange some emails or have a couple phone calls, grab coffee or dinner a couple of times, have a few conversations, feel him out a little bit, and things seem cool. Maybe open up that door a little bit wider. Maybe you can start, asking into that side of the family. Maybe asking into what happened with your mother. Maybe allowing him to meet your child and partner and whatever else. Take your time with it. I don't know how old this grandfather is. I'm running on the assumption, because you don't mention it in your question, that this isn't a situation, to your knowledge, like the one Andy referenced, where, someone very suddenly was terminally ill. But it's okay to feel it out, see if it's safe, see if it's okay, see if he's on the level, and then take it from there. And it's okay to be interested in kind of expanding your family. I think that you have a really rare opportunity here. I don't assume you'll regret it if you don't take it up. You have your own family, and family is about who you choose. It's not who you're related to. I 100% believe that. But, give it a shot. There could be a connection here. You could learn things about your mother you didn't know. You can learn things about an entire side of people related to you that you didn't know. And the worst thing that happens is you meet up with the dude. He, fakes his way through 3 or 4 really nice dinners. And then when you start actually really getting to know him, then he exposes himself for being someone hella problematic. And then you just cut the ties.
Yeah. Never give him money. Never start a business venture with him, but if that gives you a little extra security, you can always just pull the plug on this again, and you would not be a wrong person for doing that if your own family or even just your own personal emotional stability becomes at risk in any way.
Yeah. You always have the ability to walk away. So with that in mind, all this also presumes that you have the emotional capacity to deal with all this while you have a newborn baby. Since, that takes a lot of time and effort and energy and a whole lot of other things. So make sure that you're taking care of that as well. Don't let this, wreck your priorities. But I say give it a shot, Send them a message. If you get a phone number, make a phone call. Give it a shot. The worst thing that can happen is it doesn't work out, and that there's somebody out there who you gave a chance to, and they squandered it. Because you, Deeds, are 100% worth this opportunity. And if they squander it, that is their fucking fault.
Absolutely.
Think we got that one, Andy?
I think so. And let us know how this plays out, Deedsy. We're going to be very curious in following up on the situation.
We would love a follow-up.
Absolutely. If you've sent us a question and you want to give us your follow-up, or if you haven't sent us a question yet and you want to get in on this to get our perfectly unqualified advice about any sort of relationship topic, be it with a grandfather or somebody in the workplace, a friend, a pet, what have you, you can send those into lovehaterelationshippodcast@gmail.com, where we promise we'll read them.
Yep, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, or even TuneIn Radio. Hey, Mom. I don't know what my cursing level was like on this episode, but I love you. Thank you for being so supportive. You are amazing. You can also tweet us at LHRpod. That's LHRPOD with your questions, and you can follow us there to keep up with new episodes.
That's right. If you're in the mood and you want to follow us personally, you can find me, Andy Boel, at JovoCop2113 on Twitter.
Mm-hmm. You can also follow Andy's other podcast, Cult Fiction, where he and a certain somebody who I'm quite fond of talk about cult movies.
That's right.
Andy, I had to plug your podcast for you. And what's the social meets for that one?
My other podcast is Cult Fiction, where we're probably not going to watch the Hobbit trilogy anytime soon, but we do watch cult movies, and that is Cult Fiction Cast on Twitter and Instagram.
Yeah. And I'm at _X_RUIZ on both Twitter and Instagram. There you can see my weird little before after 2009 photo, as well as my weightlifting videos. Maybe I'll have deadlifted 400 pounds by the time this comes out. Probably not. But thanks for listening, y'all. And as always, tell your enemies. Sipping my wine while Andy talks to Mariah.
Either way, so.
Sipping my wine while Andy and Mo talk. Hi, Mo. I love you.
Loves you.